Walking as artistic practice has been a niche topic with cyclical levels of interest in the art world over the past few decades. Meanwhile, author and artist Francesco Carreri traces his history back to the wandering hunters of the Paleolithic era. Such long-lasting interest, both inside and outside the art world, makes this a compelling topic for both personal artistic practice as well as teaching. I first encountered the idea of walking as artistic practice in 2008 from Rosalinda Borsila, who had subverted a course at University of South Florida entitled Sight/Performance to focus on walking as an activity which organizes our understanding of space. Thinking of myself somewhat narrowly at that point in time as a performance artist, I signed up for the class hoping to glean guidance in that realm. Delightfully, the course focused very little on performance and much more on the city of Tampa as a lab that we use to explore how our environment could be understood both as individuals and collectively as a community. Since that time, I have kept an eye out for an opportunity to further indulge in this area of study. However, it seems to be a topic that is just fringe enough that it can be tough to find a fit for it in many curriculums. In that way, walking disrupts conventional notions of categorization, which is partly why I'm drawn to it. Because of this, when I encountered the open call for class proposals at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design Continuing Ed department, I knew it could be my chance to dive back into a subject that had sustained my own practice and something that I was eager to share with others. So I started small. I proposed to teach this conceptual class as more of a 3-week workshop divided into focused chunks, which felt manageable for myself and reasonable for people like students and community members taking time out of their relatively brief Minnesota summers. The first iteration occurred in summer 2019 and was conducted in person for three-hour sessions on consecutive Saturday afternoons. The second iteration just concluded, summer of 2020, in the shadow of a pandemic, using a remote online format. While it still took place for 3 hours on Saturday afternoons in Minnesota, it fell in any other number of time zones for our participants across the United States and even one in Scotland. Thankfully, the versatility of walking as an everyday medium and the fact that it is not necessarily location dependent allowed for this intriguing shift. I mention these issues about time and place because while walking might not be fully dependent on a particular location, time and place certainly have a significant impact on one's walking, especially considering any number of identity factors, which we discussed in depth. It's been interesting to see how careful my score making or the writing of the directions for these walks has become with this remote iteration, which forced me to consider a plurality of different circumstances. Walking seems to be a practice of conceptual art making that naturally reflects and feeds the teaching of itself. I should further mention that unlike teaching in the traditional undergraduate or graduate classroom, these students were not in the course purely as a requirement. These continuing education courses bring together groups of self-selecting, highly motivated students with wide-ranging backgrounds and a very strong interest in the course topic. Some are very high-achieving master's and doctoral students seeking enrichment. Others are professors themselves, while others yet are simply walking enthusiasts who have never considered that walking could be an artistic practice until they saw the title in the course catalog. So we start the course with a brief overview of selected historic examples that help trace a lineage of walking as artistic practice. While Carreri starts his history in the Paleolithic era, I start a bit more recently with the idea of Flannery in the 1800s and trace our way all the way to present day. For those with a little bit of art history background, they may recognize a few references to Dada, Surrealism, the Situationists, and land art. From there, we follow with 3 topics, one for each day of the workshop. There's always overlap and a bit of repeating as topics intersect, but I try to pick 3 ideas that are somewhat disparate and different from one another in order to create variety and multiple points of entry for our widely varying student body. We read about each topic, learn about specific practitioners, and do exercises and projects followed by discussion. There's a distinct rhythm to our days, which almost echoes the meditative state of walking itself, and it helps focus our work together. In the first year, we covered observational walking, looking to distinguish between observational practices of Flannery and the Derive, as well as specific artists such as Fallen Fruit with their fruit maps, or Hamish Fulton, whose walks stress the importance of the experience itself over any archival material. Then we examined leading versus following and reviewed walking tours by the Dadaists and scores by Fluxus, while creating our own group walks and taking turns leading. We also covered using the body as a drawing instrument by looking at artists such as Rebecca Horn, Tricia Brown, Janine Antoni, and executing our own group version of Richard Long's A Line Made by Walking, as well as individual GPS drawings. Looking back, it was luck that we focused on a good number of group walking activities when we had the opportunity to be physically proximate to one another. In the second year, we addressed walking through issues of liveness and reprise and the idea of the archive. While looking at artists such as Nancy Holt or Gabriela Roscoe, we also spent time on the question, who gets to walk and where? And we looked at artists such as Adrian Piper and William Pope L. We finished with the topic of walking as ritual, looking at processions, protests, and journeys, among other ideas. We studied artists including Marina Abramovich and Ule, Francis Elise, etc., and complemented our experiments with a variety of walking rituals. Looking ahead to next summer, I'm very interested in explicitly acknowledging the ableist foundations of walking and what walking has in common with other modes of moving through the world. And beyond that, I still need to select 2 more topics. And my list of options is overwhelming because walking is such a sprawling field. So get ready for a big list here. So currently, I'm considering topics such as parades, leisure and capitalism, mind-body connections, the importance of place or localness, getting lost or disoriented, walking with objects or props, making traces, mapping, subversion, urban versus rural, play and games, memory and nostalgia, listening and sound, measuring time and space, improvisation or intuition, the idea of walking without a destination, ecology connections, from traces to trails, social practice, intergenerational community engaged walks, walking that connects with the celestial, sensory investigations, pacing of movement through the world, tourism, commuting, research methods, issues of privilege and difference with attention to perhaps gender, race, age, etc., indigenous and colonial issues, discovery and producing thoughts using walking to speed that process, rhythm and repetition, destinations and arriving, mark making, ephemerality, endurance, public space, treadmills, intersections with technology, parks, land rights and access, anatomy, attire, the body as a unit of measurement, things that we have to do alone, foraging, poetic gestures. We could go on and on, but there's a lot to pick from, and I'm really excited for the next iteration. So whatever I decide on, I'll be using these topics as foci for a book that I'm planning to write about walking as artistic practice for the higher ed classroom. I typically write books where I find gaps in the literature, and this, to me, feels like a book that's missing. After next summer, I'll have 9 units of content, which I'll complement with a variety of resources and exercises for rounding out a full academic term. Thank you.